All right, let's talk about something that's, well, absolutely crucial and honestly sometimes a little nerve-wracking for any business: payment terms. You know, the nitty-gritty of how and, more importantly, when you get paid for your hard work. Let's get into it.
So, picture this. You've done it. You nailed the pitch, you shook hands, you closed the deal. Awesome. But, and this is a big but, the job isn't really done until that money is sitting safely in your bank account. So, the big question is, now what? How do you make sure you actually get paid?
Well, the key is understanding all of your options. And believe it or not, we're going to find all the answers we need in this one simple handwritten sketch. It might not look like much, but it's actually a brilliant map of the whole payment landscape, from the safest options for you to the really risky ones.
So, here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll look at the basic puzzle we're trying to solve. Then, we'll check out the two extremes: advance versus credit. After that, we'll find some middle ground and see how the bank can act as a referee. We'll even dive into a real-world case study with fruit and veg. And finally, wrap it all up to help you choose the right terms for your next deal.
You see, what this all really boils down to is one thing: risk. It's a classic tug-of-war, right? As the seller, you want to make sure you get paid. You want zero risk. But the buyer, they want to make sure they get the goods they paid for. So every negotiation is really just about finding that perfect balance.
So let's kick things off by looking at the two absolute opposite ends of the spectrum. These are the two extremes that our little sketch lays out for us. You could call them the seller's dream and the buyer's dream.
On one side, you've got 100% advance. For the seller, this is perfect. You get all the money up front, before you even think about shipping. Absolutely zero risk. But good luck convincing a new buyer to do that. It's a huge ask. Then, on the complete other side, you have 100% credit. The buyer gets the goods and just promises to pay you later. For a long-term, trusted partner, maybe, but for anyone else, it's basically you, the seller, crossing your fingers and hoping that money shows up. That's a lot of risk to take on.
Okay, so obviously most deals don't happen at these two extremes, right? Real business happens somewhere in the middle. We need a compromise. This is where you find hybrid models, and it's all about sharing that risk a little more evenly.
So this sketch we're looking at shows us a couple of really common compromises. One popular option is getting a piece of the payment, say 30% as an advance, and then the final 70% is paid as soon as the goods are loaded up for shipping. Or you could do 30% in advance and then give them credit for the rest to be paid later. Either way, both sides have some skin in the game. The seller has a commitment, and the buyer doesn't have to put up all the cash at once.
But what if you need even more security than that? What if trust just isn't quite enough, especially on a big deal? Well, that's when you bring in a powerful, neutral third party to be the referee, the bank. And this is where a super important tool called a letter of credit, or an LC, comes into play.
So what on earth is a letter of credit? Just think of it like a guaranteed conditional promise from the buyer's bank. The bank is basically saying to you, the seller, look, if you ship the goods and show us the official paperwork to prove it, we guarantee you'll get paid. It completely takes the buyer's ability to pay out of the equation and replaces it with the bank's promise. That's a huge security blanket for the seller.
And it works in 3 pretty simple steps. Step 1, the buyer goes to their bank and gets the letter of credit set up. Step 2, you, the seller, ship the goods and give the bank the proof, like the official shipping documents. And Step 3, the bank makes sure all the paperwork is perfect, and if it is, they pay you directly. The buyer and seller are no longer directly exchanging payment. The bank handles it, which removes a ton of risk.
Now, what's really interesting here is that our source sketch points out there are a couple of different flavors of LCs. An LC at sight means you get paid pretty much right away, as soon as the bank looks at the documents and says, yep, this is all good. A usance LC, on the other hand, builds in a delay. It gives the buyer a little bit of credit, maybe 30 or 60 days, to pay after the docs are approved. But here's the key. For you, the seller, the payment is still guaranteed by the bank. It's just coming at that specific later date.
Okay, that's enough theory. It's great to know the definitions, but how does this stuff actually work in the real world? Well, our source sketch gives us a fantastic, practical case study to look at, a deal involving fruits and vegetables.
So, let's zoom in on this section of the diagram right here. It lays out 3 different ways you could structure a payment for a business like this, where the goods are perishable, and it gives a really clear verdict on which ones are good and which are not. So you can see the options here. They range from a hybrid model with a secure bank transfer to another one that relies on just a scanned document, all the way to that high-wire act of 100% credit. But look at the verdicts our source gives.
strongly recommended, risky, and high risk. Super clear. Let's start with the best one. Strongly recommended. Why is this so good? Well, it's a perfect balance. That 30% advance shows the buyer is serious, and the other 70% is handled through a formal, trackable, secure bank-to-bank transfer. It's professional, it's secure, and both sides are protected. It's a great way to do business.
Now let's contrast that with the option labeled risky. At first glance, it looks almost the same, 30% advance. But the problem is that the final 70% is paid against a scanned document. Think about that. Scanned documents can be faked, they can be altered. A dishonest buyer could get the scan, use it to pick up the goods, and then just disappear. Never pay you. That's a huge, huge vulnerability for the seller.
So, we've decoded this whole sketch. We've gone from one extreme to the other. What's the final takeaway? Well, it all comes down to knowing your options and making a smart choice based on who you're dealing with and how much risk you're willing to take. So here are the 4 things you've got to remember. 1. Every deal is a balancing act. 2. Always know your extremes, from maximum safety to maximum risk. 3. Those hybrid models, they're your best friend for building a solid business relationship. And finally, number 4, when the deal really matters and the stakes are high, let a bank be your referee. It's the ultimate peace of mind. And that really brings us to the final question, the one you need to think about. Because every deal is different and every business relationship is unique. Now that you know the landscape, think about your own situation. In your next big negotiation, where are you going to draw that line between trust and security?